Hi everybody, I'm the 100 Proof News Hound here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today we're going to go back about exactly 100 years, back to 1925. Did you know at that time there were teams of cat burglars that stole tens of millions of dollars from people all around the United States every year? And that there was a private detective in New York City who specialized in jewel heists who thought he had developed the perfect crime. But that J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI were determined to spoil everybody's fun. This is their story, and quite a story it is. But before we get started, like and subscribe. Hit the button. Subscriptions especially are very important to the development of this channel. So let's go. Let's start by giving you a little taste of what the cat burglary thing was all about. Here's the headline in the New York Daily News. Saturday, February 22nd, 1930. Hunt, Park Avenue cat burglar. He climbs 14 stories, robs penthouse. What kind of guy would do such a thing? Well, how about this guy? A top-hatted, gray-spatted Raffles. Got to unpack that. Raffles was a fictional character who was a gentleman jewel thief. So we've got a guy who's a gentleman jewel thief in a top hat and spats. You know, spats, the things on tops of shoes, the white little guys that lace on, movies in the 1930s. He's been using his hooked cane to pull himself like a human fly up apartment house walls and into the homes of wealthy Park and Fifth Avenue families, and he's being sought over a $10,000 burglary that happened the night before. Now, it happened during a party. Now, I'm sure this is the kind of party that you were invited to, but let's see what's happening here in this penthouse apartment. Early Thursday evening, while Miss May Fairchild was entertaining distinguished guests in the luxurious triplex apartment of her nephew, and who's her nephew? Sherman M. Fairchild, multi-millionaire inventor and chairman of the board of the Fairfield Aviation Corporation. While they were hosting the party, the gentleman burglar climbed 14 stories to the apartment roof, pulled himself over, gained access, and stole the jewels. Well, that certainly looks like something out of a movie. But it wasn't. It happened in real life. Now, this is where we meet our protagonist here. The federal insurance company, insurer of the jewelry, immediately put Noel Scaffa, that's the man, gem detective on the job. Gem detective actually is a job. He's a detective who specializes in gems. He's convinced the burglar is the same one who's robbed 4 wealthy apartments since Christmas, escaping with thousands of dollars worth of gems. And then it's noted that so well dressed was the burglar that he attracted attention as he stood near the servants' entrance. I think he would in his top hat, tails, spats, and cane. Now, the first burglary that really brings Mr. Scaffa to the public's attention happens, 100 years ago exactly, back in October of 1925. It says, police probe inside job theory in $1 million plaza jewel theft. Woolworth heiress victim in largest gem theft in city history. And I think it's the largest gem theft up to that time in the history of the United States. Well, what's the background? How did she lose the $1 million in jewelry? Well, the first thing we notice is that it gets knocked down, the amount gets knocked down to $683,000, which is still over $20 million in today's money. So this is nothing to be sneezed at. It turns out the woman, the Woolworth heiress who married a gentleman named Donahue, was a bit of an eccentric, and we'll see that. She loved jewelry, and she wore her jewelry everywhere. She never went anywhere without a full spread of jewelry, and not fake, not paste, real stuff. It's noted here that one of her hobbies in which her husband cooperated was the assembling of 2 superb strings of pearls. She went out and combed the world to find the best pearls she possibly could. They just come back from a trip to Europe where they bought 2 pearls with a value of $40,000. So those 2 pearls are worth $1.2 million. And they just had Cartier mount them onto the necklace. Now, interestingly for our thing here, they hadn't had time, because it only happened a few days before, they hadn't had time to update their insurance. So the necklace, which was worth $450,000, $15 million, was actually only insured for slightly less than that because the 2 new jewels had not been added. Now, they were staying at the Plaza Hotel, as one does, while they're having some renovations done to their Long Island estate. They're staying there not just alone. The husband and wife are there, but swells back in the 20s and 30s didn't travel alone. They traveled with their entourage. They had a valet and a butler and a masseuse. Then they're all in adjoining rooms up there in the hotel. Mrs. Donahue comes back from a car ride. She's out there just touring the city in her limousine. She comes back from a car ride and decides to take a bath. So she goes into her bedroom. She takes off her jewelry, tries to hide it at the back of one of the drawers in the nightstand, and goes in and takes a bath. 20 minutes later, she comes out. She doesn't check the jewelry at that point in time, but later on in the day, a couple hours later, she checks and the jewelry's gone. And she's beside herself. Now, we've got a couple of photographs here, one on page 28 of the Daily News of Sunday, May 1st, 1927, showing Mrs. Donahue in all her glory. You know, you don't want to make fun of people, but I guess if you're really rich, you can make fun of them a bit. She looks positively, well, it looks like lunacy. This is how she would go out in public. No wonder somebody eventually robbed her. But anyways, they got another nice picture of the jewelry here. And it's noted that they didn't report, and this is important, they didn't report the theft to the police right away. They waited several days. They contacted their insurer. Their insurer contacted our hero, Mr. Scaffa, and he brought him in. They brought Mr. Scaffa into the investigation. Here's what was in the Daily News on October 12th, 1925. Donahue's $680,000 gem theft. Arrest near, police say. But it's not the police that are out there doing the investigation. It says an arrest will be made in the Plaza Hotel Pearl robbery, and the property recovered today or tomorrow, according to information obtained in police circles. So the police are sort of just, something's going to happen, but they're not controlling it. Something's just going to happen. So they're going to wait and see what does happen. It says here a letter was sent to the Scaffa Detective Agency within the past 24 hours, which reveals the true story of the robbery and locates the jewels according to the police information. So Scaffa to the rescue. He's located the jewels and he somehow negotiated their return. What he did, what happened here is, now, how this all works is that the insurance company generally will pay 10%, a 10% reward to the individual who returns the pearls or returns the jewelry. And he's negotiated $75,000 as a float to go out and try to do the negotiations. He's able actually to do it for $65,000 and returns $10,000 to the insurance company. So the jewels are recovered, but the police are on the outside. They got no man. They want to talk to Mr. Scaffa. Here we have the New York Daily News, Wednesday, October 21, 1925. The Great Jewel Robbery or the Unknown Man? Well, here we go. On September 29th, while Mrs. James P. Donahue, daughter of the late F.W. Woolworth, was taking a bath, $683,000 of jewels were stolen from a dressing table less than 10 feet from the bathroom door. About a week ago, Noel C. Scaffa, a private detective, walked into police headquarters and delivered the missing jewels. He's got them. He says that he contacted an unknown man who later was identified as Sam Layton, someone who never appeared, and he's probably a fiction, and that he returned the jewels for a reward of $65,000. It says the unknown man was offered $5,000 more if the thieves or thief could be apprehended. The same mysterious person was said to have gone away saying that he was hopeful that this could be accomplished, but he's not been heard from since, because he's not going to go back. This is all part of that perfect crime. And let me just sort of explain that. Now, if you've watched, remember the old TV show Banachek in the early 70s Sunday nights? He was exactly what Scaffa is here, an investigator who worked for insurance companies and returned the goods. But the more famous one is in the Thomas Crown Affair, both the original with Faye Dunaway and Steve McQueen and the lesser remake. Faye Dunaway's character, again, is an insurance detective and will get to keep 10% of what she gets here. Why it's the perfect crime, if you think about it, is this. The jewels have been stolen. Say $500,000 in jewels are gone. The insurance company negotiates with the detective or with whoever to pay $50,000 for their return, 1/10 of the value. The jewels are then returned. The reward of $50,000 is split between our man, the detective, and the actual thief. So let's see who's happy. Property owners are happy because they got the jewelry back. The insurance company's happy because they only had to pay 10 cents on the dollar on the value of the claim. The crook is happy because he's got 5% of the value back, and that's all he probably would have got if he'd fenced this thing. And because Scaffa's also got 5% of the take, he's happy too, and he obfuscates and delays to the point where they'll never get a conviction. They'll never find the actual thief. So the thief's happy too. Everybody's happy. It's a victimless crime. The only only entity that's not happy is society, as represented by the police, because a crime has been committed, but no one's being brought to justice. But everybody involved in the crime is thrilled. And so that's why, from that perspective, it potentially is the perfect crime. In the article that we just quoted from on the New York Daily News, it goes on, here's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, jewel robberies ever pulled off in New York. A mantle of mystery was immediately thrown over it. The jewels were returned suddenly and quietly, and now the public is asked to believe that an unknown man returned them and is expected to forget all about it. One expressive Americanism covers this affair, and that is bunk. The public is entitled to facts. What are they? We hope the district attorney's office will help. They're pretty useless. But they charge Scaffa with a crime. It says he's going to be tried in the Donahue case. He's charged with the crime of compounding a felony, which is kind of akin to obstruction of justice. He's interfered with normal justice. He's shielded bad guys and he's delayed and obfuscated. So what the paper says is failing to produce a thief to whom he said he paid $65,000 for the return of $683,000 worth of gems stolen from Mrs. James Donahue last October. Noel Scaffa, private detective, must stand trial as a criminal. Acting as an agent for the federal insurance company, he said he paid a mysterious Sam Layton for the return of the jewels, but that Layton did not show up afterwards as promised. The insurance company had agreed to pay 10% ransom for their recovery. So there is, he's going to trial. And the public is outraged. Probably not, but a couple guys at the newspapers are outraged. This is New York Daily News, Tuesday, March 2nd, 26. Mr. Scaffa, very private detective. We look forward with interest to the coming trial of Mr. Noel Scaffa. And then it concludes, we hope the coming trial will intrude greatly upon the privacy of Mr. Scaffa's detecting. We hope the people of this city will be given to understand that the theft of $683,000 worth of jewels is a crime and not material for the plot of a comic opera. Well, it is the material for the plot of a YouTube channel, but it gets pretty funny later anyways. While he's awaiting trial, it gives us an opportunity to do a little background work here on who is Noel Charles Scaffa. And most of this stuff is going to be important, so take notes. He's born, guess where he's born? Noel Scaffa is born in Sicily. Think about that. You're in New York City, 1920, and you're born in Sicily. Comes to America as a young boy. His dad dies when he's 15. He finishes school and he goes off and he starts working for Pinkertons. He works for Pinkertons for a number of years, and he actually works in their jewelry department. And he becomes really good at is breaking the clients. By that I mean a large percentage of jewelry of reported jewelry thefts to insurance companies are actually frauds. The person bought the jewelry, they've gone into financial trouble, they need cash. If they sell the jewelry, they might get 25 cents on the dollar, but if they get it stolen, they'll get 100 cents on the dollar. So what Scaffa became very good at was asking direct, pointed questions of the insured and getting them to break. And when they broke, charges were almost never laid in these situations. The company was happy to just get rid of the claim. The swells who tried to cheat the insurance company are embarrassed, and the thing just goes away. And that's how it was all done in the 1920s. Now, he's tried twice on these charges. The first time he's tried results in a hung jury. They then try him a few months later, and the judge moves for an acquittal, and he's acquitted. So he's not convicted of any crimes associated with the Woolworth jewelry. But there is an interesting article there is an interesting commentary here in the New York Daily News, September 29, 1926. Squealer and Donahue case unquestioned. They had a witness with the name, and I keep bringing these names up because they're so damn run. His name is Pockmark Dillon. He had a story to tell the jury that he was in on the whole deal, in that Scaffa owes him money as a percentage of the take, and that he's been stiffed. But his tale was so unbelievable, even if it was true, that the prosecution chose not to use him as a witness. Now, while the trial's going on and Scaffa's laying low, jewel heists continue to go on. And I've got a few of the jewel heists here that take place over the next few years, and these are just the ones, not just the ones in New York. These are just the ones in New York that Scaffa is publicly involved in. That's a tiny fraction of jewel heists. Now, if you remember, most people, look, if you're really good, you might remember the Pierre Hotel jewelry robbery in New York City in 1960-ish. And you might, if you're younger, you might remember the Kim Kardashian jewel heist in Paris a few years back. But jewel heists, they don't exist. There was that one big one in Antwerp, and there was another big one in London, but those were like gangs busting into the vaults. That was more of giant capers. But the actual a cat burglar kind of jewel heists almost don't exist anymore. At least we don't hear about them. But here are some here. Headline in the Daily News, October 4th, 1925. 2 New Yorkers each lose gems worth $150,000 in the West. That's $4.5 million, and by the West they mean Chicago. Two jewelers go to Chicago. One is robbed at gunpoint of his wares as he's going from appointment to appointment in Chicago retailers. And the other fellow does a switch on him. He's got his trunk checked and ready to go to the train station. They switch it with another trunk that's empty. He gets to the train station, he ain't got no jewels. They never solved the case, but one guy was arrested, and I'm including this just for the novelty of his trade. It says Louis Grossman, said to be be a hotel loiterer was arrested. He's the only person to whom Morse said he had mentioned the jewels. Hotel loiterer is put down as what this guy does for a living, I guess. I guess maybe that again is a Damon Runyon kind of thing, where Fat Lip Louie would be down, in the lobby of the hotel looking for tips at the races. Anyways, another one, October 5th, 1925, $162,000 new gem theft probe as police trail Donahue suspect. So while they're still looking for the Donahue jewelers, the Donahue jewel perpetrators, this is one of those big ones. 3 vaults are dynamited for diamonds valued at $4.5 million. I did the exchange there for you. Then, on April 16th, 1926, heiress to $1.2 billion robbed. Muriel Dundas reports theft of $40,000 in gem. Scaffa's on the job, the newspaper says. Then the Daily News on March 7th, 1927. New $25,000 gem robbery. Rabbits for wizard's hat. Now there's a bunch of stuff going on here. Noel C. Scaffa, whose wizardry at returning stolen gems so far exceeds the ability of the police, that he is under indictment for compounding a felony. This was done right at the time he was waiting trial. Is once more on the trail of a mysterious jewel thief. The sleight of hand private detective is trying to trace $25,000 worth of jewels that disappeared from the home of H.H. Gibson, real estate operator in Brooklyn, New York. Now, this is, people back then, were they just more intelligent than us? They certainly were better educated than us. It says it is a sub rosa robbery. Do you know what sub rosa means? Under the rose. And what the rose is it's an historic symbol for privacy. So it's a secret kind of robbery. Who the heck today would know that? That they're just throwing Latin in the middle of their articles, and people are picking it up. Police were interested to learn how Scaffa learned of the robbery last Wednesday when the police know nothing about it, has added to the mystery. So he knew about the robbery days in advance and had been retained. It says here the burglars, who knew the lay perfectly, obtained admission to the Gibson apartment last Wednesday by posing as telephone repairmen. I swear that if you put on a set of coveralls, carried a clipboard, and put a pencil up in your ear, you could probably get into the White House without anyone challenging you. Second time we've heard the word squealer today. Squealer tip speeds Livermore gem hunt. This is New York Daily News, June 2nd, 27. It says the police had a tip that a gang that made its headquarters at 116th Street and Lenox Avenue may have been responsible for the $92,000 Livermore jewelry robbery. Now, they mention a fellow in here, a detective, John D. Cogle, okay? Oh, so John D. Coughlin. And what's interesting there is that if you're a devotee of detective stories, Nero Wolfe, Philip Marlowe, even if you've watched the Rockford Files, there's a hate-hate relationship between private detectives and the police detectives. But there always is one guy that seems to get along good with Jim Rockford or Nero Wolfe, and at least if not cooperative, at least is not totally is at least helpful. Moderately helpful. Let's just say. So Coughlin is the one who's helpful to Scaffa here, and he notes that that among the interesting things that were happening in this particular heist were attempts by Nassau County Police to trace a call to NASA Police headquarters from a private telephone in New York. It says here that the attempt was unsuccessful, and that's the first time I've heard of anyone trying to trace a call as they do in the movies. It's noted here that the robbers what they overheard on that telephone call is that the robbers were having disagreements amongst themselves, and the one had been beaten with a pipe, and he was ready to talk. But he never really did talk. But I do believe most of those jewelry was eventually recovered. Now, the next robbery that we have here took place on August 26, 1927. And it had to be staged. This couldn't have been real. It says $108,000 jewelry theft called inside job. $108,000, again, it's $4 million in jewelry. It says dreams of perfect crime seem realized. Why they say it's a perfect crime is that the whole family's at home and the jewelry is stolen from the nightstand inches away from the head of Mrs. James H. Snowden. And it's noted that when America's most successful trailer of society jewel thieves, Noel S. Scaffa, chief investigator for the Federal Insurance Company, arrives tomorrow, the only thing he's going to be told is that a Buick Roadster was seen parked on the Montauk Highway immediately in front of the Hastings home. Now, how do they know that was there? Because they questioned the staff. And they knew how to live back then. How many people do you think were working in the home of Mrs. James H. Snowden on the night of the theft? Try 14. They had 14 servants. And it says here that the fact that that car was parked at 3 a.m. out on Montauk Highway was as a result of questioning one of the chauffeurs. So there's more than one chauffeur amongst the 14 staff. Scaffa is a private investigator specializing in jewelry, but occasionally he'll take other assignments. And this one is too weird to pass up. There's a guy named Rogers who marries a woman who he thinks is a Habsburg princess. I mean that when I say it. So that from the Habsburg royal family of Austria, that she's a princess. He gets involved with his business partner in some crazy alienation of affection, undue influence trial that has to do with this woman's effect on him. Rogers wants to know, is this woman really a princess? So he hires Scaffa and his company. Scaffa by this time has about 16 other detectives to look into it. And it's noted that Scaffa's report, secretly submitted to Colonel Rogers, definitively shattered whatever dreams Colonel Rogers had of joining the American House of Rogers with the blood strain of the royal. So she's not a princess. What is she? What is she? She is, Scaffa reported, the descendant of one Mike Patzauer, a Hungarian of Jewish descent coming from the Hungarian village of Mishka. Records found by Scaffa in Budapest show that Mike Patzauer, father of the subject, received permission to change his name to Peabody when he was naturalized in the United States. And Rogers eventually paid $500,000 to the plaintiff to settle the lawsuit so he wouldn't have to put his wife on the stand to talk about what her actual origins were. Scaffa, though, does. It's in 1935 that Scaffa does run afoul of the law. And he runs, for the second time, but this is the most serious thing. Headline in the Daily News on a double-page spread here, Sunday, April 28th, 1935, is Detecting Noel Scaffa, crack jewel detective. Federal probers try to learn how he retrieves gems. So the feds are now interested in what's he doing here. The article goes on. Now a detective is being detective. Federal authorities are determined to learn more about the private life of Noel Charles Scaffa, the jewelry detective and gentleman juggler, who has police and pigeons, plutocrats and politicians at his beck and call. All the tricks of the trade which he has perfected with such profit are being turned on him by J. Edgar Hoover. First time we heard about him, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The department wants to learn whether the gem retriever has been transporting stolen goods or merely giving invaluable advice to the police. With respect to his career, the article does a nice job in summarizing the career. It says here, it took him 5 years to learn he had to play ball with the New York police. It took him twice that long to build up a network of stool pigeon aides and to gain a reputation for jewel retrieving which has Pinkertons green with envy. And it took almost thrice that long for Mr. Scaffa's unusual career to come to the attention of federal authorities. They explain in the article how the whole scheme works. And the companies would much prefer to pay a 10% reward for the return of stolen jewels than to pay the face amount of the policy to the jewel owners. And in the good old days, they were quite willing to take the jewels, pay the reward, and no questions were asked. Now, when a robbery occurred, the thieves sold their loot to a fence. The fence had a friend who happened to be a Scaffa stool pigeon. Scaffa purchased the jewels from the fence and returned them to the insurance company. The company paid the reward, which Scaffa divvied up amongst his business acquaintances. It says here, there were times when the fence himself called Scaffa, and it finally reached the point where certain thieves, sure of immunity, and the immunity is that granted by Scaffa's obfuscation and willingness to close his mouth, they did their own telephone. They just called Scaffa directly. But this is why the FBI really got involved. They do not scoff at the idea that many of the jewels that are stolen are taken with the sole purpose of selling them back to the insurance company. That's been a flourishing racket for years. It's all part of this perfect victimless crime. They get a little personal here, and I don't know, I wonder what they're hinting at. It says, although he's been prominent in the news for 10 years, few know that his father's dead, that he lives up on Crotona Parkway with his mother and school teacher's sister, and that he is not interested in women. I wonder what they mean by that. With respect to his career, it goes, since 1928, when the late Judge Mark Levin directed a jury to bring in a verdict of acquittal in the Donahue case, Scaffa has been working hand in glove with the police. He enjoys picking out a few of them, making them his friends, and throwing his cases in their direction. They make arrests and gather information on his behalf and get credit for good work, and he bows out quietly. So he's willing to give credit for the arrests and for the investigation to the police, along with some money, to keep the wheels greased and keep everything moving. And it says that, in fact, it is just possible that his feelings for law and order got him into his present trouble. Well, as we look into this, that we'll see. Remember, initially he wouldn't cooperate with the police, but he learned that that's what he had to do. So he goes down to Miami, gets involved in a very sticky wicket here. It's about a jewelry heist. This case is a jewelry heist at the Biltmore Hotel in Coral Gables, Florida. A swell by the name of Bell is robbed of more than $200,000 in jewelry. And it says here, his most recent trouble follows the armed holdup in January of Mrs. J.E. Bell and her friend Henry Conton in Miami. They were robbed of $246,000 in jewels. It says, and here is Scaffa trying to work with the police. After a private interview with Eugene H. Bryant, chief of Miami Beach detectives, Scaffa had a private conference with Montone. Montone is one of the two crooks who actually stole the jewelry. So he's trying to work a deal out here and return the jewelry for the appropriate amount of money. It says on March 18th, Bryant, that's the police detective, announced the jewels had been found in peculiar fashion. He'd received a call to visit a hotel. Harrington, one of the other detectives, had accompanied him. They left their car and entered the hotel only to find that the call was a blind. Nobody was there. When they returned to the car, mysteriously the jewels were in an envelope on the front seat. J. Edgar Hoover found out through his sources that wasn't the case. It says here, after the agents for J. Edgar Hoover discovered that Scaffa had given Bryant the key to a lockbox in which the jewels were found, the discovery story was deemed to be a hoax. So what really happened, there was a locker at the bus station, and he had given Bryant, the detective, the key to the lockbox, and he went down there and got the jewels. But that didn't seem as romantic as the mysterious placing of the jewels on the front seat. Also, the jewels on the front seat being placed there mysteriously, would cause the police not to have any leads on where the jewels, who the actual bad guys were. And Hoover, like I said, Hoover would have none of it. It says here, Hoover, in trying to learn whether Montone took the jewels to New York, claimed his share of the insurance reward and allowed Scaffa to return the jewels to Florida. See, what Hoover's trying to do is say that the jewels left Florida, went up to New York, the ransom was paid to Montone, and then Scaffa brought the jewels back to Florida. That would be in violation of the National Stolen Properties Act and punishable by a federal felony. So he's charged with that offense. He's also charged with perjury for giving, well, at least two and perhaps more stories to the police and to the FBI about how, in fact, the jewels were moved from one location to another and how they eventually were obtained. It says here, finally, that the New York police are sorry to see their old friend Noel Scaffa in trouble. They say his work is legitimate. The insurance companies are sorry, too. Well, a lot of his work was legitimate. We'll get into some other things here, but he helped out along the way. He did investigations that resulted in murderers going to jail. He legitimately recovered gems in some instances, probably because he didn't know the perpetrators and allowed those people to be arrested. He did just enough to keep the police happy. Here's an article, August 18th, 1935, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Headline, he specialized in recovering stolen jewels, but Noel C. Scaffa, who has kept one foot in Park Avenue and one in the underworld, has at last been caught on one of his own nets. Here's what happens at the trial. Well, at the trial, I'll break it to you gently. At the trial, he's acquitted of the charge of transporting stolen goods across state lines. That's the more serious charge. He is found guilty of perjury, and he's sentenced to 6 months in jail. But here's what the St. Louis Post-Dispatch had to say. When a jury in federal court here recently found poker-faced Noel C. Scaffa guilty of perjury, it put a temporary stop to one of the most remarkable of detective careers. Scaffa's forte is recovering stolen property, specifically jewels. Moving quietly and without fuss, he has regained more than $2 million worth of hot ice. $2 million is $60 million, and we're going to find out later there's much more than that. Police everywhere speak with admiration of his prowess. Where they have failed, he has succeeded. He has, moreover, been liberal in splitting rewards and in giving the public the impression that it was the cops, not he, who did the excellent work. Splitting rewards with police isn't that bribery? I think so, but that's what he does. Scaffa might have gone on indefinitely with one foot in the underworld and the other on Park Avenue if it hadn't been for the Department of Justice and its, great word, pestiferous G-men. J. Edgar Hoover, chief of the department's Bureau of Investigation, held that the sleuth's relations with the underworld were inimical to the public good, and he set his men on the trail. That he did. And Scaffa noted that Scaffa had just engineered the return of $185,000 worth of gems taken in a robbery from Mrs. Margaret Hawksworth Bell, but that the whole affair looked fishy. And in the end, it proved fishy. And out of this hunch by J. Edgar Hoover came Scaffa's conviction. So he's convicted. He goes to jail for 6 months and he gets back out. He slows down a little. He's approaching 50. He slows down a little, but he doesn't stop. He's invited to attend a trial of jewel robbers in Buffalo, New York. And here's the Buffalo News article. And the reason I'm including it just to show that, not only to show that he's back in action, but it's Damon Runyon stuff. Noel C. Scaffa was in attendance at the Buffalo trial of 5 men headed by Stanley Schibel, quote, the millionaire kid. I had to say that. You got to put the millionaire kid in your video, even though I have no idea who the millionaire kid is. But it is also mentioned that his brother Edward Schibel is a brother of the millionaire kid. So the millionaire kid was convicted along with 4 other guys, and they were sent to prison for a long period of time. And I can only assume that Scaffa was going to be a witness in that trial, but he was not needed. Now, more burglaries are happening, and more involvement by Scaffa. 1936, June 25th, Long Island burglar gets $500,000. Remember that. That's 15 or so million. They say, though, it's a second-rater. It wasn't a real pro who did it. It was a second-rate guy who got lucky. It's noted here that the biggest gem theft in Long Island history, almost $500,000 worth, fell early yesterday into the hands of a burglar who police insisted was just a small-timer who got lucky. The Coe family, it's noted by Scaffa, though, that the Coe family better hope he finds the jewelry, because that $400,000 worth of jewelry was only insured for $250,000. And I think they did get most of the Coe jewelry back. Now, another jeweler, this is interesting. They followed this fellow, an 87-year-old man, all the way from New York City up to the Adirondacks, from his swell penthouse in Manhattan up to his cottage in the Adirondacks before robbing him. It says here, the shadow band of jewel thieves, which has dogged the family of Adolf Lewinson, millionaire banker, recently struck at the household a second time. To the wooded shelter of the 87-year-old music patron's Adirondack camp came the cat-footed pursuers. They removed the diamonds around 3 a.m. So he's robbed up in his Adirondack camp. You ever seen those camps? The camps are just are giant mansions in the woods. It says mystery in large heaps was flung over the robbery when the news learned that Noel Scaffa, ace recoverer of stolen gems, had gone to work on the case. Scaffa was released from jail earlier this year, so he's out and he's about trying to solve the Adolf Lewinson millionaire banker jewel theft. This is an oddity. It's one of the last thefts we'll look at, but it's an oddity. And I think if you're a psychologist out there, could you please reply in the comments and give me your opinion on what this is all about? It says, relief client is victim in theft of $300,000 in gems. Relief client means a guy on welfare. A guy on welfare had $300,000. That's $9 million worth of gems stolen. It says, with one suspect under arrest, the Maze police today probed deep into a theft of $300,000 in gems from a man on relief who kept his loss secret from the authorities for 6 months lest he loses $15 a week allowance for food. Wouldn't give up his, 1930s version of food stamps, and wouldn't go to the police about his $9 million jewel theft. Well, they got a guy in custody. I don't know how much of the jewels they found, but the authorities also called in Noel Scaffa. This is one of those usual suspects kind of things, because if you've done it 100 times, they must assume you're going to do it 101. Famous jewel detective to explain whether he played a part in the victim's efforts to regain property without knowledge to the authorities, which is probably what happened, because that's exactly what Noel Scaffa has been doing for the past 20 years. Springfield News, Springfield, Ohio, June 5th, 1938. They do an article, a 2-page article, completely explaining the scam, completely explaining what's going on in the jewelry trade. And the headline is, New York's gem gorillas have profitable racket. They note that the last few years have been just great for jewelry thieves in New York City. It says the operations are particularly fruitful in 2 areas. Long Island on the Gold Coast with the giant mansions out there, and along Park Avenue and the Upper East Side for all the swells that are there. It says the police have even instituted, as of December 1936, a special squad of jewel guarding detectives whose job it is to go to places where swells have dinner, like the Stork Club, Club 21, the Copacabana, and then identify who's wearing the most jewelry and not accompany them, but follow them home at a discreet distance and intervene if something goes awry. And they did. They actually prevented many robberies, but not all of them, because they note the co-robbery we just talked about for $400,000 included a $300,000 pearl necklace. The Curbs family robbed of $40,000. The Herman family, $25,000. Gypsy Rose Lee, the stripper, was robbed of $25,000. And poor Charles Milgram, he's robbed of $90,000, which is, almost $3 million. But here's what they did. The guerrillas who took over his Long Island home 2 weeks ago burned the soles of his feet with cigarettes until he revealed the hiding place of his wife's valuables. Wow, that's a real Jack Benny thing. Your money or your life, and Benny goes, I'm thinking. Anyways, says that the jewelry racket was booming in the 20s. They're in the roaring 20s, but when the Depression came in, it slowed. People got a little self-conscious about wearing, millions of dollars in jewels around their necks, and they put them away. But then since 1935, it's been back. The fashion is now to wear your stuff out and about, and that's causing all kinds of mayhem in the trade. The police marvel at the sophistication of the jewel thieves. It says police talk of international rings of thieves or rackets as departmentalizes legitimate businesses of spotters, sluggers, fencers, cutters, and wholesales. Spotters find the goods. Sluggers go out there and slug and get the goods. Fencers sell the goods. Cutters, the large stones are identified. They say the large stones are identifiable by professional jewelers, and you can't fence them easily in New York City. So you got to take them offshore. They go to Antwerp, and they're recut and then returned, and then end up in the display cases along in the Diamond District. It says police suspect that the purloined jewelry is buried for months or even years. It is smuggled to Europe, recut, and then in a manner unknown slipped back into the showcases of reputable jewelers. And it's noted, particularly, the only person who's named by name is Noel Scaffa, who says the insurance company detective used to know men who knew the men who knew where to recover the kidnapped stuff. So he had the ins on when the jewels were hidden away even for years. He knew guys who knew where they were. They said that as a result of this recent splurge in jewelry thefts, that the cost of insurance had tripled from 2%. You generally will pay $2 per 100 to insure your jewelry to $6. It had tripled. It was now costing 3 times as much to insure your jewelry as it once did because, they're suffering these kinds of losses. Then, on October 10th, 1939, we discover in an article in the New York Daily News why Mr. Scaffa was able to gain access to the criminal world to the extent that he did, and why he seemed to have the protection of the criminal world, and why he was as successful, more successful, not just of anybody in the diamond trade, but anybody in any detective trade in America at that point in time. And it's all in this article. Headline: Lepke partner seized by U.S. as a tax. The Lepke partner is Frank Costello. Frank Costello is the head of the Luciano crime family in New York City, one of the 5 families, and he's being charged with tax evasion, as they often do. He's been charged with tax evasion for failing to report income gained in his Louisiana slot machine empire. They call it a pinball empire, but it's slot machines. And so as a result of that, he's being charged. And as an aside, in this article, it's noted a prominent Broadway character, that's Mr. Costello, owner of a popular Saratoga nightclub, was indicted 4 years ago, along with Noel Scaffa, a famous gem detective, for allegedly conspiring to steal $185,000 worth of jewelry owned by Mrs. Margaret Hawksworth Bell. The indictment against him was later dropped. So Costello is charged along with Scaffa for that crime, but because of his power, influence, threats, money, whatever, perhaps just lack of evidence, the charges against Costello are dropped, and Scaffa, in that particular instance, becomes the fall guy. So many other times he set up other people to do the fall guy. This one, he was the fall guy. But that explains everything. He's born in Sicily. Costello's Sicilian. The mob in New York City in the 20s and 30s, is, aside from some Jewish members, is almost entirely Sicilian. That gave him access into the criminal underworld. And when they're talking about having one foot in the underworld and the other on Park Avenue, that's exactly what they're talking about. So now that we have that mystery explained, we've got the last crime or the last loss that he's ever consulted on. This is in the Miami Herald, Wednesday, August 7th, 1940. Scaffa of Biltmore robbery fame hunts $65,000 in pearls. So $2 million in pearls. What happened? It says here that according to an international news service dispatch, Scaffa has been employed by William Mortimer, an agent of Lloyd's, the British insurance underwriters, to search the fairways and sand bunkers of a private golf course in Fulton County, New York, for a $65,000, $2 million pearl necklace. These pearls are very expensive. Lost by Princess Elizabeth, can't pronounce it, but I'm going to try, Georgiaz, while strolling over the course. You believe any of that happened? That she took a stroll, that this princess took a stroll in the golf course with a $2 million pearl necklace and somehow dropped it in a bunker? Well, that's the story, and they're sticking to it. I have no idea what happened with whether he was able to find that or not, but that's the last time we see his name in the press, except as all of us for the obituary. Here we are, Brooklyn Eagle, Monday, September 1, 1941. Noel Scaffa, 53, dies. Recover of stolen jewelry. Mr. Scaffa, who was 53, lived at 56 7th Avenue, Manhattan, with his wife, Estelle. He got married. When? Whom he married on July 5th this year. He's living there with his mother-in-law. His mother must have died. He was living with his mother his entire life. His mother must have died. He gets married. He moves in with his mother-in-law. It says Mr. Scaffa, who once estimated he recovered more than $10 million worth of stolen jewels, started his career at Pinkerton. That's more like it. He recovered $10 million, which is more like $300 million in stolen jewelry. Now, he does appear, his name appears one more time in the press. New York Daily News, January 13th, 1943. That's when his estate is probated. Noel Scaffa left a estate of only $4,305. It says Noel Scaffa, ace gem sleuth, died intestate August 31, 1941, has left an estate of only $4,300. And that's according to estate tax appraisals that were filed. He had 1,000 times that money. He had to. Did you really think that Noel Scaffa, friend of Frank Costello, is gonna file true probate documents with the state of New York? I hope that on the day after he died, his wife Estelle went down to the bank and there was a large safety deposit box which she pulled open and it was full of diamonds. That would be a much more fitting end to the life of Noel Scaffa. Go back and think of where we started here with that. Now, if we go back, that dapper gentleman in the top hat, tails, and spats with his cane going up 14 14 floors to rob the penthouse apartment. He gets back to his townhouse in Midtown Manhattan, and what drink would he have? Well, he'll have a jewel thief. There actually is a drink, the jewel thief. It's 1.5 ounces of Canadian whiskey, 3/4 ounces of Madeira, 1/4 ounce of Galliano, a teaspoon of passion fruit liqueur. Go find that one. And 3 dashes of bitters. Now, because it's all liqueur, you can stir. You don't have to shake. Get a tall mixing glass, fill it with ice, add the ingredients, stir 30 times to properly chill and dilute. Then strain into a chilled martini glass and garnish with a hard twist of lemon to get that acid out there. Now, that's a perfect way to end a larcenous evening. And this is a perfect way to end this chapter of our YouTube station. Now, if you can like and subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated. Hit the button. We'll be back next week with another fun episode of American history. So everybody out there, take care.